frankly couldn't resist because I love a good love story. But what was also really compelling about this topic was it might not be the sexiest topic, you know, when we go to these conferences and seminars and the like, but it's got some real teeth. And for those of you who have hung out, you know, at 4:15 today, I think it's going to be really worth your while. This is clearly an area where we need to pay some keen attention because it has the potential, I think, to really change up how we buy display. And that, I think, is the sort of the key point here. I mean, clearly the trend is moving towards audience buying, and it's a strong, compelling trend, and it's not going away. But the difference here, or the added element, is the real-time bidding, which is how we buy that. And you can make, I think, a reasonable argument that you know, the bidding or the auction model is what really surged the search engine marketplace.
Excellent.
So I think it's something that we all in this business really need to understand. It can be, I think, a bit intimidating. You know, we're talking about trading desks, right?
And it really helps
but
people cut
you
through
know,
all the
some of the
noise
conversations
and
I've had with the
understand what's happening in the
panelists,
space
it's
and
really not all that
see where
complicated.
all the
But I'm
forces
going to
that are
let you
driving
all
the future
decide
space
that for
are gonna
yourself,
have impact
because
on
the
your business. So when
objective
you're
here
ad network,
is for these
agency,
guys
or
to
publisher,
really give you very
we've got
real, no bullshit
slight decline in growth
examples
because of the
of
economic
how
down
this stuff
on the outer
works,
edges.
you know?
Opted-in
I
way
have warned
where
them
the
that I will
user
not tolerate
allow them
bullshit,
to
okay?
maintain
So
all that content in
anybody
the
hears
cloud.
any, you know,
And
just
in that
raise your
cloud, they'll be
hand
able to
and
set their
I'll tell them
preferences. And their
to
preferences will be,
shut up.
hey, I've got this new
I have
TV
also asked them to
pilot, or
please
I've got this new
introduce
game, and I
themselves
wanna
because I don't want to
release
get
it on
any
this
of their
date,
names
and I want to reach
wrong.
this kind of audience, and I want you to dynamically
We'll
price
start with my left
what that
check.
price point is for me so that you maximize the amount of income that I can receive over a certain amount of time on it. So the exchange is going to take all of those preferences and they're going to balance them together and maximize the value for the entire
candidates and causes. So we've taken a list of every registered voter in the United States, and we have made that list actionable with online advertising and targeting across the country. We have about 300 federal campaigns that we've worked for since 2009.
Chris Hansen, I'm president of NetMining. We're an audience scoring and targeting ad network.
Vic Kathuria, I'm the managing partner at Mediacom, responsible for running the digital investment group.
Qasim Saifi, I'm the GM of Media Services at OpenX. We run one of the leading independent ad exchanges out there.
Dave Simon with Turn. We operate a DSP and a data management platform that's used by several of the Fortune 500 companies and several of the leading global agency holding companies.
Thank you. That was very good. Good job, guys. I wanted to start out with really kind of understanding what for the audience, what the differential, you know, is. What does real-time bidding bring that other media tactics can't? So my first question to the panel is, what can RTB deliver that other media tactics can't?
I would say first, I wouldn't call it a media tactic per se. I mean, RTB is plumbing. It's kind of the universal adapter for media. So I don't look at it as a tactic. It's a conduit to get to inventory in a very efficient way. So for us, it's just a matter of looking at how we buy media, and we buy a lot of audience. We're an audience network, so we buy audiences and try and target people very specifically, and we do it in real time. So having the ability to buy and secure media in real time and make decisions on the fly within 100, 120 milliseconds is very powerful for us because it aligns very well with the way that we buy and target audiences.
Adding to Chris's point, from the agency perspective, so we've been doing this for about a couple of years now, and one of the biggest, I think, advantages from a real-time buying or bidding perspective is operational efficiencies. So anytime you're looking at media teams that buying multiple networks, it just sort of makes no sense where we can consolidate and focus on a centralized data management platform. So there are definitely operational efficiencies to be had. And on top of that, you start layering actual real-time actionable data. And there's a big difference between just layering on data and data that's actionable and then has, more importantly, a relevant attribution. That's what's really key to sort of driving performance from real-time buying.
So I would actually say that for us, what we've seen that RTB enables, and again, to Chris's point, it's just plumbing, right? It's just a methodology. The reality is that in RTB, if you see a user that you know is valuable to you, you can buy that user. In no other form of media can you do that. Everything else is a proxy. You buy a particular TV show because you know that TV show has a good overlap. And even if that overlap is 30 or 40% of the audience you care about, you call that worthwhile. In RTB, if you take a good set of data and you define a user and you expect a certain performance from that user, you can only buy those users. And that's, to me, what RTB offers that no other media tactic delivers.
I think that's a great point. In the case of my company, fundamentally, the ecosystem we've built around RTB has fundamentally changed our business. You know, we used to target voters using geographic targeting, looking at concentrations and heat maps of where they lived. And now my clients are really interested in the ability to serve an ad clearly to a registered voter. And the whole ecosystem that we built enabled to take a direct mail list and make it targetable online. And so without that, we wouldn't be able to offer what we're doing today.
I think, yeah, to the point of efficiency, I think we've talked about operational efficiency and sort of technology efficiency. There's one other thing that's pretty important, which is pricing efficiency. So the way that these RTB-enabled exchanges generally work is via second price auction. And this allows buyers to feel comfortable that they're not overpaying for inventory. So, you know, Dave's point, if there's a user that, you know, one of Turn's clients really, really wants, they can buy that user and bid an awfully high price for that user, but know that they're not going to overpay simply because they value it more than anyone else. And that's simply due to the second price nature of the auction. And, you know, to your point, that's really how the search marketplace took off. And we've adopted many of those same principles on the RTB side.
All right, so we're talking a lot about buying, which is only one part of a successful campaign, right? And one part of the process. So help us understand where strategy, planning, and then creative plays a role in terms of delivering an overall successful campaign with RTB. How's it changed, or does it change the strategy and planning process, and does it change how you might deploy creative?
So I think from our perspective, to your point, creative actually plays a really big role, and especially within the massive inventory environments of exchanges we're talking about. I think you guys are probably closer to this than I am. I think with daily impressions on roughly 20 billion daily, some ridiculously high number, right? So almost, we've seen some of the campaigns to be successful, you almost need multiple sets of creative, and it's very, very important based off the attribution modeling to see where in the purchase funnel the consumer is. Are you talking upper, middle, or sort of all the way, you know, towards the end, and literally based off that have relevant creative that's served at that time. So from our perspective, it's been interesting working with the planning teams and really figuring out what the overall strategy is, because there's absolutely room for overall premium, or we call it premium buying. So, i.e., you know, homepages, for example, or premium display ads. And outside of that, you also have then site-specific, and then of course you have audience buys. So all of those play an equally important part, and it's, I think, really important to keep that in mind in terms of RTB will work for a specific KPI in terms of what the overall brand objectives and goals are, but at the same time, it's very important to have the 360 view, so you have the overall integrated view from 360 buying as well as site-specific buys, and then looking at audience buys.
Yeah, so to Vic's point, he brings up an important issue. I think creative strategy and planning is as important as it ever has been. The one new thing that planners need to be cognizant of is that RTB environments have a lot of fragmentation in terms of creative strategy. So, creative execution. So in RTB, you can buy mobile, video, display, expandables. A lot of the platforms will integrate with your email campaigns, which means you need to think that I'm not just putting together a 300 by 250 to go expose to the universe. But that's true of any form of media. You have to think about the types of places and the types of people who will be viewing your creative. So I think the fragmentation in you know, actual creative that they have to create, that's new, but it's not different from what has been done before.
You know, in politics for years, media plans are made based using data. So you're looking at the population that's in a particular geography, you're looking at how they're registered, you're looking at how they turned out in the past, And the Republicans for years, at least the last 20 years, dominated the political landscape because they were great at direct mail, and they were great at creating micro-targeting plans that they used a medium where they could actually ID a voter and send them a communication and measure that the communication got there. And I think what's happening now is this whole ecosystem enables that old process to move online and a lot faster and more efficient. And my suspicion is that any owner of real first-party data that they've been using for years now has a window into the online world that they can just migrate all the activities that they used to do where they weren't completely sure of its measurability, and now they get complete transparency to that. And I think that that ultimately will mean dollars will begin to move out of that, the old media into the new media, because they can use the same data modeling tools.
That's interesting. I'd like to actually hear from the other panelists too. You talk about complete transparency. Years ago, one of the things that sort of bit us in the ass, I think, in the industry, was transparency and real measurability and accountability. And the truth is, there really is no exactness in the data. The data is not absolute. Does though RTB make the data more absolute, more certain in some way?
So I'll speak to it from sort of the perspective of an exchange, which provides inventory to a lot of the folks that are sitting on this panel. And we believe that transparency is key to providing value to our clients. And so from our perspective, we are fully transparent, and we believe most exchanges are generally pretty transparent about the inventory that their clients have access to. And so that goes down to everything from geography to category to all the way down to domain. And ultimately, we believe that it's that level of transparency that's going to result in value that's created not only for these clients, but ultimately their clients as well. So I think transparency is pretty much a prerequisite at this point for participation on the exchange side.
So maybe we learned our lesson with BT and networks from years ago.
Yeah, exactly. There's no, the notion of a blind buy has essentially disappeared.
And it'll get better with maturity too. I think the ecosystem will weed itself out of folks that aren't transparent and folks that misreport. When real money moves into the channel like it's moving into, that's what advertisers are demanding. And so it's going to be a self-selecting.
But I wouldn't say that RTB actually gives full transparency. I mean, it is still something of a myth. I mean, there is some transparency that's given with RTB. There is a URL that's passed through the bid that you can either bid on or not bid on. So there is that level of transparency. But there still are a lot of inventory providers, publishers, publishing groups that do not want to expose their inventory, that it is bought through this channel, sold through this channel. So you do get a lot of anonymous inventory, you get a lot of blocked inventory, a lot of blocked URLs. So sure, it's improved with RTB. It is still not there. There's still a reticence from the publishing side to give that exposure that I am making my inventory, my expensive and valued inventory available through this auction. And so what we found is that there are a lot of ways in which we can glean information from the RTB calls. There's companies like, AdSafe. I'm not looking at them as like the pure media verification, but AdSafe and companies like Proximic who can sit in the bid request and actually look at information and understand what is coming from this URL. Where on the page is it coming from? Is it above, below the fold? Is it where geography? Does it match what my geographic IP settings are? What's the context? I mean, these are important things that I think with RTB, you can get this through doing some sort of daisy chain or doing some sort of passback or all the sort of now antiquated ways of hooking in with inventory. I think RTB now opens that up and gives you maybe perhaps a little bit more insight.
I think, Chris, you're absolutely right. I think there's definitely some misnomer in terms of transparency because we've had issues with a lot of our clients where we've been trying to get them on and there have been issues with transparency and control. So absolutely, we've sort of taken certain steps in terms of white lists, being really upfront, telling us, or sort of blacklists in certain cases, it's really important. So we've also done AdSafe and double verify. But what's also interesting is we've also tried just building our private exchange. So there are companies in the space like Legolas, for example. So if you can go out there and you have a private network of publishers, and there you have complete transparency and control at the same time. So it's almost like a combination of white lists as well as different technologies which work to some degree, and then doing some of these private networks as well. So it's really across the board.
Yeah, like I feel like that's where RTB is really powerful. It allows you, again, it's the plumbing, it's the universal adapter. I don't know why that's sticking in my head, but it's the way to plug into inventory where before you couldn't have a relationship with these direct publishers. Now you can, and just use RTB as the conduit. It's very powerful. That does give you true transparency. You do really rely right now on blacklist and whitelist as the measure of transparency, and you know, for a lot of advertisers and a lot of buyers, it's not enough. And so I think RTB is going to kind of change that.
But you know, the interesting thing is that I think we've all seen that Terry Kawaja slide, right, with 4,000 different point solutions, right? Yeah. No idea.
I thought we weren't supposed to mention that on panels anymore.
So the reality is that, you know, we all knock it for being an incredibly complicated ecosystem. Every single one of those companies is trying to solve something where there's a problem. And transparency, and just to be clear, we're talking about inventory transparency. Where is my ad going to show up on a page, right? There are 15 different companies out there who have a different methodology or a different solution designed to do just that. There are a handful of companies who are trying to make data more transparent. How do I target the right user, and when I'm targeting a user, what's your definition of that user being qualified for my campaign? You know, we see people, 12 different solutions for creative execution. We see 15 different, you know, every single one of those companies is trying to solve a problem. So while it is complex, and RTB has given birth to this incredibly complicated and overcrowded ecosystem, RTB was just the first step. Right? And now that we've done the hard thing of, like you said, connecting with publishers in real time and independently evaluating impressions as we deem them appropriate or as we deem them worthy, you know, now we can start to deal with some of the other bigger problems, like transparency, like cool creative execution, stuff like that.
So transparency clearly is still somewhat of an issue. What are some other issues? Or actually, let me flip that around. But if a number of folks in this room, you know, wanted to work with, you know, one of you or another provider, what would be some of the really critical questions that they should ask to make sure that they're going down the right path, so to speak?
So I'll come at it from the perspective of not really having, you know, a dog in the fight, in the sense that most of our clients use a partner. You know, they're not, advertisers aren't generally coming to us directly. To me, one of the things that's critical when evaluating a partner to bid on your behalf in these exchanges is really understanding how they bid, right? So many of them, you know, you think about RTB and really it is plumbing. There is a pipe and there's a brain that evaluates each impression. So, you know, oftentimes you will not know why the brain bid 84 cents for an impression or $1.72 for an impression. If, as an advertiser, I think among the most critical questions that you can ask of, you know, a DSP or anyone that's going to bid on your behalf is having them explain to you why they value a particular impression at a certain price. And if they don't have the capability to explain it to you in English, to me that's a red flag as a client. And so I would make sure that you can, you know, your DSP partner can articulate why they bid a certain way. The other thing that I think is important when evaluating, you know, a DSP or anyone that's going to bid on your behalf is making sure that you're not using multiple ones in conjunction with one another, right? So, you know, the beauty, as folks have pointed out here about RTB, is it gives you the ability to sort of evaluate each impression discretely. And so it allows you to do things like global frequency capping, which you couldn't do before. But the moment that you have multiple partners bidding on your behalf at the same time, you've eliminated the value of doing that, and you're also bidding against yourself. So, you know, I'd encourage, you know, buyers to evaluate multiple partners, but not at the same time and not with the same campaign.
Yeah, I would actually go one step further. I would say that if your DSP partner can't show you in their platform graphically how they're bidding and how their logic works for justifying or valuing an impression, that's a big red flag. And then the second thing is that, you know, to your point, what questions should we be asking? It used to be, what's your reach, right? How does ComScore measure you in terms of reach? Now it should be a question of scale, which is a little more complex, but still critically important. You know, if I have a very small audience and my DSP can only reach can only receive 20% of the available RTB impressions because they haven't invested enough in hardware, that's a concern because it means that your ability to find your small, very valuable audience is reduced by 80%. So it's a question of scale. How many queries per second can you receive? Asking guys like the exchanges, who do you have to throttle? Things like that are a really good indication of scale.
As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the key things that we look for is a proper attribution modeling is hugely important. So again, sort of we have our own using business sciences, but at the same time also working very closely and sharing that with the DSPs, the DMP, saying this is ours, what's yours. Let's be really crystal clear in terms of the attribution modeling as well as the KPIs. So in terms of whenever the rationale for bidding is explained to us, we can completely understand and make sure in terms of it's actually at the end of the day goes towards what the KPI or the business goal for the client is. So it's really the clear, relevant KPI tying back to the attribution modeling is really, really important as well.
One of the things I would say is when it comes to the technology, I think the infrastructure is really important. I think it's often overlooked in terms of what you need to do RTB. There's a huge investment that needs to be made for servers to handle these requests in real time. But when I think about it, I think about what is the technology that's actually powering the decisions to deliver the ads appropriately. And for us, I mean, we do scoring in real time. It's something that makes us different. We do it across retargeting ads. We do it across audience targeting ads. I mean, that makes us different. I would actually argue with Qasim and say, I hear all the time, well, my company's running with a DSP, so we can't run with you guys. And it's infuriating to me because it's like, well, is your DSP doing X, Y, and Z? Are they deciding on when to serve the ad at the appropriate time? Are they bidding appropriately? And oftentimes, I think with something like retargeting, there's not much technology to it. I put a tag on a page, I collect the segment, I target the ad. And for us, it's much different in the way we do things like retargeting. So for me, it's a little frustrating when you get that response. It's like, well, you can't evaluate these things just because we have the same RTB integrations, just because we have the same integrations in with data providers doesn't mean we're the same. We actually do things very differently. And so it doesn't have to be at the exact same time, but I would definitely argue that you have to try out these technologies. They could overlap each other. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world.
I'm definitely not arguing that you shouldn't try multiple partners. In fact, you should, because frankly, it's not clear that a particular campaign is going to work the same. If one particular campaign works well with one partner, it's not clear that all of them will. But I do think that it's a flawed approach to run them simultaneously.
No, I agree with both of you guys because I think we sort of face that all the time on the agency side. So we have, at MediaCom, we have multiple DSPs, DMPs around. We work with Group M's Xaxis, we work with Turn, we work with, right? We work across the board, right? And to your point, I've sort of faced that when dealing with the teams. I'm like, well, you've been using XYZ, DSP for the past quarter. Would you like to try a new one? Oh, I don't know. It's been doing well. I don't want to try something new. We're like, well, how will you know if something's better or worse, right? So it's almost sort of forcing them to this mindset saying you've got to overlap maybe, to Chris's point, maybe the last 2 weeks start overlapping and then see the result of the new DSP or the DMP. But it's really important because without that, you would never know. So I think it's really critical because what we've seen in our experience is there are certain companies that are better, maybe at certain verticals, if that makes sense, maybe technology or CPG or branding versus DR. And again, I think all these companies, all the folks, all the fellow panelists, I'm sure they're investing heavily in technology and people and resources. And make no mistake, is as much as it's your algos and how great those are, it's the account service and the people that make a huge difference. And believe me, I've seen it more than once. So I think it's a combination of all those factors. So it really, to both sort of Qasim's point and as well as sort of Chris's point, you highly encourage to actively try multiple DSPs, obviously not at the same time, but have a coherent strategy. Because at the end of the day, it's not only the algos, the algorithms, the uninitiated, but it really is the people and sort of the account teams behind them make a big difference.
I want to actually get back to one of the premises for this panel, which is love stories. So this is really great, I think extremely helpful information, but let's help everybody in the room sort of fall in love with the idea of real-time bidding. Which is a little difficult to do when you're talking about, data and all that. So I'm going to ask whoever wants to share, some of your greatest success stories, either with your own company or one that you've read about or something that you can share and something with, some, again, real meat on it that will really illustrate to everybody, what you can really accomplish with RTB.
I'll give an example. So, Vic mentioned before that there are 15, 20 billion impressions a day available in RTB. And what that means is that if you have the ability to read all of those impressions, even if you didn't buy a single one of them, you have a determination. If you didn't win any of those impressions in the auction, you still have an idea of what you valued those impressions. Well, that means that for 15 billion impressions, you can have a general idea of what you would have paid. So as a result, now you can start to do some forecasting. You can say, all right, well, you know what, I would have assumed that I would have been able to deliver this many impressions for this many users. One of the things that I think helps people fall in love with RTB is to get an understanding of how many people they could have reached, how much money they could have spent, how much performance they would have gotten out of that particular campaign, and what it would have taken, and how long it would have taken to do it without spending a dollar. And that's the reality here, is that because it's an auction marketplace, you can start to model things out. You can say, you know what, if I want to upload this data that I know is customer data, I'm an insurance company, and here are all the people who are policy holders for my insurance company, and I want to know what it's going to take to put my new offer in front of those people. Before I've spent a dollar, I can get a sense of how much I'll have to bid, of how long it's going to take to reach those users. None of that is available in any form of traditional, I call it traditional, old digital buying. Right? You can't do that without RTB.
And I could put a little flavor on that. We had a client that was doing some fundraising around the healthcare debate. And as everyone may or may not remember, there was a long debate about, is nationalized healthcare a good thing or bad thing for the country? And this organization started to test ways to raise money around that. And we used RTB to test different calls to action and different messages. And leading up to the vote, we ran basically 12 different ads. 11 of them were issues ads, and one was the call to action was fire the incumbent. Fire a person that was at the front of this. I won't name names. Leading up to the debate, 99% of the clicks and the interest in were all issues based. 10 minutes after the vote, no one ever clicked on an issue ad again, and all they did was click on fire the incumbent. And in 4 days, $1.5 million was raised on the fire the incumbent ad. So without that real-time feedback mechanism, we never would have known that, and the tool never would have moved all the impressions to the creative that was working.
This might not be the greatest, but it's the most recent one. We have a large retailer, both online and brick and mortar. David mentioned it before. I mean, real-time bidding gives you the ability to decide on whether to deliver an ad to a specific user on a specific site and determine what that bid is going to be, again, in 100, 120 milliseconds. So we score all of our users. They come into, in this case, it was a retargeting campaign. We score all the users that came to the website. In the beginning of the campaign, we had a really hard time hitting the metric on the campaign as a direct response client because it's a retailer. And so we decided to target only the real-time bidding inventory sources and to target only users who had a certain score. So our system decides, based upon their buying propensity, what their score is. So it was, where our score works, we basically targeted everybody above a score of 300. And we put in a max bid price that was significantly higher than sort of the legacy campaign. And within days, that portion of the campaign just went gangbusters. I mean, it actually brought the overall, it was a CPR metric, a cost per revenue metric, which is maybe a little deceiving in the way that they calculate it, but a cost per revenue metric, it brought it almost to half of what it was. The overall, not just what was running on real-time bidding. So, just looking at that, having the power to determine, based upon someone's interest, what I want to bid on them. I mean, if it was the old way of media buying, there was no way we could have gotten to that specific goal.
So are we in love yet? We have a little more work to do, maybe?
I mean, come on, take a look at these guys. How can you not? Especially David. It's Dreamboat.
I'm flattered.
I think it would be also interesting to know, and guys, maybe you could give some sort of an idea. What sort of budgets or goals are you seeing that are being applied to real-time bidding? What's the ranges? What are people looking for? What are they coming to you with?
I don't know if it's a question of budgets coming specifically for real-time bidding. I think it's, for us, the way that the media is bought. A lot of the media is moving to real-time bidding, so the budgets obviously are moving over there. So I would say that in 2011, I mean, we saw a fundamental shift. I mean, it started in 2010, but 2011 was definitely the year of RTB. The growth, I think, continues into 2012. I think the way people access inventory using real-time bidding, beyond just using it for pure auction-based exchange sell-side platform, actually going and creating deals with publishers and using that as the conduit, I think that'll be sort of the story of 2012. You'll see a huge spike in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, I generally echo that sentiment. We've seen growth in RTB spend on our exchange north of 300% this year. So it's a pretty clear indication that the world is moving in this direction, and I don't see that stopping.
One of the sort of poorly told stories in RTB is that RTB buying has been used to justify guaranteed buys of publishers. So if there are any publishers out there, please take note that we absolutely see this happen. Publishers, I think had a lot of reticence for RTB, and rightfully so. It's sort of a risk center. But the reality is we've seen more often than not that if we're able to show a bid on a particular publisher and our reach, our spend on that publisher is X, right? And the CPM is well above what that publisher may charge for a guarantee, that advertiser will go out to that publisher and say, hey, listen, we'll cut a deal with you for X plus 5, right? Because they know that that inventory has worked. RTB is being used as a discovery tool for guaranteed buys, which is the inverse of how I think a lot of publishers are seeing it. So to your point, what kind of dollars are coming online, coming to it? I mean, RTB is being used for audience targeting and that sort of thing, but in addition, it's driving guaranteed and direct sales as well.
I have one last question. I think we're going to open it up then, right, Steve? We're getting to that point? Okay. Does real-time bidding totally destroy any notion of media clout? Does media clout even exist really anymore?
So, Denise, when you mean media cloud, you mean from a publisher's perspective or from an
agency media buying? Years ago, you used to always hear about media clout now, and you would still hear about media clout in digital as well. Although I would argue that digital really started to kind of deteriorate that whole notion quite some time ago. But if you're buying more media, okay, if you're commanding more media dollars or more budget, does that give you any advantage at all in terms of real-time bidding?
I think from our perspective, agency perspective, I can speak. So, as far as media cloud is concerned, it's absolutely well and alive. Especially you're talking Group M's, global, the biggest, digital buyer in the world, right? So the media cloud is absolutely there, right? It's specifically when you're talking about even real-time bidding. So you're right, technically it's auction-based. So hey, you bid what's appropriate based on your attribution model, and you go from there, kind of like search, right? The big difference here is not only do we have cloud. What's interesting is since, for example, if you're doing a lot of buys, and from our perspective, I think audience buying, real-time bidding is maybe, I'm guessing about 10-15%, if that. I think Sean's in the audience, can correct me if I'm wrong. He's closer to it than I am. It's about 10 or 15%. The rest is just sort of, size specific or upfront buys and so on and so forth, right? So what's interesting is, and some of these bigger buys or upfront buys are with some of the biggest publishers. And depending on where the inventory is coming from, so a lot of times we would either go and set up private exchanges or directly talk to these bigger publishers and say, hey, if I'm buying an X percentage of inventory from you directly, i.e. premium inventory, at the same time I would also like Y percentage available to me through a private network on an exchange. So if anything else, I'm using my premium buying cloud to get a private exchange and even get more guaranteed better deals.
Yeah, I think this is another panel, by the way, Steve. But I think that's another really interesting and not much talked about topic. And I think real-time bidding starts to really put that into question. And I think you make a very good point. But I think we would like to go, yeah.
What percentage is remarketing of real-time bidding about? I'm sorry, my name is Susie from PM Digital, and I'm just curious, in real-time bidding, is a big percentage of it remarketing, or is it more just straight display buying?
I mean, I would guess that a lot of it being bought is for audience targeting, so a broader category, just basically layering data, whether it's first-party data, retargeting data, or third-party data, or some combination of. I would guess the majority of it, because it works so well, the way you buy in that sort of environment in real time, putting a specific price around, someone who you really think is interested in buying something makes it very powerful there. So I would guess a significant portion. I mean, Qasim, you might actually know.
Yeah, so if we're talking about buying against any piece of data as opposed to buying against first-party data, what I'd say is it's probably north of 70% of impressions are bought based on some sort of data. Now, whether that's first-party data or third-party data, I wouldn't know. These guys would know better than me. But most of inventory is bought with data behind it.
Yeah, I think to Qasim's point, it's true. It's about, I'd hazard to guess about 50%, but a lot of times people start with retargeting, and once you reach sort of certain scales, then you have to open it up, and then you sort of open up using multiple data variables, and then go from there and build out an attribution model. Then it sort of starts to expand. So you probably start with retargeting, and then based on, the scale issues, you start to expand. So I would definitely say about 50, 55, and then you expand from there.
I mean, the type of business we are, 100% of what we buy through real-time bidding is all audience-based, first or third party.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, in our world, about 5% of our media budgets are towards retargeting to users that have clicked before and then you're marketing to afterwards.
What's the state of the relationship with publishers, with premium publishers? David, you mentioned that a lot of publishers are still reticent. They may not. Some of them are finding that they are getting discovered with RTB buys. It's one of the things that I've heard in some of the case studies that I've covered is that buyers are actually discovering places that they didn't know existed before, where their audiences were sitting. But generally, where are publishers sitting in their relationship to the RTB system now?
Go ahead.
Sure, go ahead, go for it.
So, our team works with publishers every day to get them into the exchange and have their inventory accessible for the buyers sitting here. And what I would say is, while initially there is some hesitancy on the part of publishers to participate in RTB, most of the reasons that they don't want to participate aren't fully thought through. So there's this notion that it's going to cannibalize my direct sales. I've lost control. The fact of the matter is, publishers have a high degree of control when it comes to the specific advertisers that are going to show up on their site, the types of brands, the types of creatives that show up. So they have a degree of control that sort of eliminates to a large degree the channel conflict issue. And ultimately, as we've seen, there's been an increase in CPMs delivered through RTB over the course of at least the past year. And as the dollars flow, the publisher's inventory will flow with it. And it has allowed us to go out and secure what I'd consider premium inventory. Folks like the Huffington Post, like LA Times, these publishers that maybe a year ago wouldn't have been comfortable putting their inventory into an exchange are now running.
Yeah, I would say that it's actually a lot better than most of the press would indicate. I think the first problem we had was a marketing problem, and we mean collectively the industry. We came out with the notion of, we've got RTB, there's this new company called a DSP, there's this new thing called an agency trading desk, and all the publishers heard was, I'm not going to be able to sell as much. Well, that really wasn't the intent, and now that we've done a better job of defining our roles in that space, right, DSP meaning we're a software provider who allows advertisers and agencies to transact with those partners that they already do a lot of business with. That plus the private exchanges, the SSPs enabling publishers to have pricing controls, preferred pricing, first look pricing. All that stuff means that the publisher's reticence to interact through RTB has decreased a lot. If Forbes can find a place in RTB, I think just about anyone can. And they just announced their participation, a couple of weeks ago. So I think it's a lot less than the hype in the industry, and it's actually pretty good.
So guys, let me ask you, so what's interesting, you're both absolutely right? But what I've been hearing is based on some of the pubs that we talked from the agency perspectives, love and hate, right? So especially with the whole summit, at the much ballyhoo summit of Yahoo, AOL, MSN. So, and they're supposedly gonna shut all you guys out because apparently at some point in Q1, turn off all the inventory, all networks, all DSPs. Is that all at the end of the day? Is that just talk? I mean, for example, HuffPo and so on and so forth. So supposedly this summit does go into execution mode at some point, right? Wasn't that technically? Is that supposed to sort of?
All that inventory is going to be available via RTB, right? It's just a
Right.
matter of the platform that's available through. So,
Right.
you know, Microsoft inventory is certainly available via RTB. Yahoo inventory is starting to make that turn. AOL, we'll see what happens. But I think by and large, the publisher consortium that they're trying to build is really about making that inventory available via RTB with the degree of control based on, you know, on the individual publisher.
And that's the new paradigm of media clout, right? If you're an agency trading desk, is AOL really going to say, no, you can't buy our inventory through RTB? Probably not.
So we don't need another panel on that now, right?
We've solved that.
We saw that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, terrific. I hope that some of your questions were answered. I want to thank the panel very much. You were really helpful in the pre-panel preparation, and hope we all learned something today. Thanks, Steve.